Okay, let's jump right into a passage that really gives us one of the most breathtaking contrasts you can find. We're opening up 2 Chronicles chapter 35 today.
Hmm.
It paints this, well, vivid picture of national revival, only to kind of slam into a wall of sudden tragic downfall just paragraphs later.
It's truly jarring, isn't it? You see King Josiah, who'd already done so much reform work, leading this moment of, well, unparalleled devotion.
Yeah.
Then, boom, without pause, the narrative pivots to this fateful decision that ends in his death. It's a powerful study in leadership, piety, consequences, all of it.
Absolutely. And it all kicks off with this incredible celebration. The source makes it really clear this wasn't just any Passover. It describes the sheer magnitude of it in Jerusalem during Josiah's 18th year as king.
It really hammers home the significance. It says, the Passover had not been observed like this in Israel since the days of the prophet Samuel. Think about that.
Wow.
And none of the kings of Israel had ever celebrated such a Passover as did Josiah. I mean, not since before the monarchy really got going, and better than any king before him.
Yeah.
That tells you this was something else.
That's a huge historical marker. And what's fascinating is the deliberate organization, the preparation that went into it. Josiah wasn't just ordering it from on high.
No, he was deeply involved, making sure it was done right.
Yeah.
He appointed the priests, got them set up for their duties,
Yeah.
gave specific instructions to the Levites too.
Right.
Yeah, the Levites had this crucial role, preparing themselves, getting their divisions sorted out based on the old guidelines from David and Solomon. They handled the technical side of the sacrifices and, importantly, helped the people understand it all. It wasn't just empty ritual. It was meant to be meaningful. And he gave them this really specific instruction about the Ark of the Covenant. He told the Levites, put the sacred Ark in the temple that Solomon built. It is not to be carried about on your shoulders.
Now, the ark, the symbol of God's presence, it had this history of being mobile, right? Carried into battle, moving with the tabernacle. So telling them to put it in the temple permanently, stop carrying it. What's the significance there?
Ah, that's a key point. Putting it in Solomon's temple. That represented like a settled central place for worship, the fulfillment of that earlier vision.
Okay.
So telling them don't carry it around anymore, it signals a break from those, earlier times of more nomadic worship or when its location wasn't fixed. And in the context of Josiah's reforms, trying to centralize everything in Jerusalem, get rid of other shrines, this reinforces that. The temple is the spot now. Fixed. Central.
Got it. So meticulous organization, clear roles, centralizing this core symbol. What about the sheer resources needed? The numbers the source throws out are staggering.
They really are. This was massive. The text says Josiah himself coughed up 30,000 sheep and goats just for the Passover offerings, plus 3,000 cattle.
Whoa.
That's a huge personal donation from his own stocks.
30,000, just from the king. And then you've had the temple officials, Hilkiah, Zechariah, Jehiel. They add another 2,600 Passover offerings and 300 cattle for the priests.
Right. And the Levite leaders weren't left out either. They gave 5,000 Passover offerings and 500 cattle for their fellow Levites.
So it's like everyone's pitching in.
Exactly. The scale of these contributions, from the king, his officials, the Levite leaders, it shows this incredible level of buy-in at that specific moment. It reflects how successful Josiah's reforms had been in getting people genuinely committed to this national act of worship. It wasn't just following orders. The resources were pooled like never before.
It really paints a picture of unity, enthusiasm. The text even walks us through the practical steps. Slaughtering on the 14th day, priests sprinkling the blood, Levites skinning the animals, setting aside burnt offerings according to the law of Moses.
Yeah, and it even details the cooking. Roasting the Passover lambs like they were supposed to, boiling the other holy offerings in pots and pans, and serving it all quickly to this huge crowd. Every step followed the rules precisely. This wasn't some rushed, improvised thing. It was done with real care, according to the law.
And you really feel the dedication. The priests and Levites, they just kept going, sacrificing until nightfall. The musicians, all set up according to those ancient arrangements from David's time, they were in their places. Even the gatekeepers stayed put because their fellow Levites basically covered for them, make sure they got what they needed.
It really emphasizes that everyone had their job and the whole system just worked. The source makes a point of saying, so at that time, the entire service of the Lord was carried out. as King Josiah had ordered. It was complete, successful, a full execution of the command.
And it wasn't just the one meal. It went on for the full 7 days, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, just this profound national recommitment. You could argue it was the high point of Josiah's reign, maybe even Judah's history after the split, in terms of following the law.
It definitely seems like the culmination of all his efforts, trying to restore that relationship with God based on the law they'd rediscovered. A moment of incredible light, incredible obedience.
And this is where the chapter takes a turn so abrupt, it's almost like whiplash. The source signals it with just 3 words. After all this.
Right, after all this, after this magnificent, unprecedented celebration, after all this, when Josiah had set the temple in order, Necho, king of Egypt, went up to fight at Carchemish on the Euphrates, and Josiah marched out to meet him in battle. Just like that.
Yeah.
Instantly shifts from internal religious harmony to external geopolitical conflict.
So Necho, the Egyptian king, he's heading north, way up near the Euphrates River to Carchemish, a really strategic spot. He's not invading Judah, right? He's just passing through, presumably needing passage or maybe heading to fight alongside someone else.
Seems like it.
But Josiah decides to go out and fight him, to intercept him. This seems out of the blue. Why would Josiah do that?
That is the million-dollar question the source kind of leaves hanging, doesn't it? Josiah was known for being pious, following the law. This move seems incredibly risky politically, and, well, we know how it turned out.
Yeah.
The text doesn't spell out his motives. Maybe he felt he had to protect his borders. Maybe he was playing geopolitics, aligning with Babylon against Egypt. Maybe just a massive miscalculation. We don't know for sure. But what the text does give us is Necho's reaction, and that's crucial.
Right. Necho sends messengers, and the message is very direct. He says, "What quarrel is there between you and me, O king of Judah? It is not you I am attacking. Basically, stay out of it. This isn't about you."
But then he drops this bombshell. He attributes his mission to a higher power. Necho tells Josiah, "God has told me to hurry, so stop opposing God who is with me, or he will destroy you."
Whoa. Hold on. The king of Egypt, a foreigner, says that God, presumably the same God Josiah worships, told him to do this, and that Josiah, by getting involved, is actually fighting God. That's not coming from a prophet of Judah. It's coming from the potential enemy. What do we make of that?
This is maybe the trickiest part of the whole story. The writer, the chronicler, records Necho's message, and later on explicitly says Josiah didn't listen to Necho at God's command. So it forces you to think about, well, the complicated ways divine will or guidance might show up. Maybe even through sources you wouldn't expect, sources that make you uncomfortable, or even seem hostile. It kind of challenges the idea that God only speaks through the usual channels.
So how does Josiah, the guy who just led the biggest Passover revival in centuries, how does he respond to this message that's explicitly framed, at least by Necho and seemingly by the chronicler later, as being at God's command?
Tragically, the source says Josiah, however, would not turn away from him, but disguised himself to engage him in battle. He doubled down.
He disguised himself.
Yeah. And then the text underlines the fatal error. He would not listen to what Necho had said at God's command, but went to fight him on the plain of Megiddo.
So he didn't just ignore the warning. He ignored a warning specifically tied to God's command, according to the text. And the disguise, maybe hoping he wouldn't be a target, it didn't work. This defiance, or maybe misjudgment, right after reaching this religious peak, it's so hard to square. What could possibly have led him there?
It's a real puzzle. Scholars debate it constantly. Was it overconfidence after all his success? Did he just flat out not believe Necho's claim about God's command? Maybe thought it was just, political spin?
Right. Could be.
Or maybe he believed God wanted him to defend Judah against any foreign army marching through, even if they said they weren't attacking Judah. The text, well, it doesn't give us his thoughts, just his actions and the writer's take. He would not listen at God's command. It really highlights how incredibly difficult discerning guidance can be, especially when it comes from weird places or seems to contradict what you think you should be doing.
And the battle happens at Megiddo, a place notorious for battles throughout history. And the result for Josiah is quick and final.
Yep. The source says archers shot King Josiah and he told his officers, "Take me away, I am badly wounded." Just like that.
Immediately taken from his war chariot, put in another one.
And rushed back to Jerusalem. But it was too late. He died there, buried in the tombs of his fathers.
The contrast, just brutal. The absolute national high of the greatest Passover, this act of profound devotion, obedience. immediately followed by the king's death and a battle he chose to fight after ignoring a message presented as divine.
It raises really deep questions, doesn't it, about how piety and, say, political or military judgment relate. I mean, leading a massive religious revival doesn't make you immune to the consequences of bad decisions elsewhere.
So what happened next, the aftermath of losing this king so suddenly?
Well, the mourning was intense, widespread. The text says, all Judah and Jerusalem mourned for him. Clearly, despite this final fatal choice, he was loved, seen as a great king.
And Jeremiah the prophet, who was active then, he's specifically mentioned, he composed laments for Josiah.
Yes, which really underscores the significance of his death, the depth of the grief from a religious standpoint. And the mourning wasn't just a brief outpouring. It became this lasting tradition. The source notes, to this day, all the men and women singers commemorate Josiah in the laments. And these became a tradition in Israel and are written in the laments.
Likely referring to the Book of Lamentations.
Seems very likely, yeah. Suggesting his death was just woven into Israel's collective memory, their way of expressing sorrow.
The chapter then wraps up mentioning other details of his reign or elsewhere, but this specific sequence, the Passover peak, the Necho clash, the death, the mourning, that's the real dramatic core of chapter 35.
Exactly. It leaves you, the reader, with this stark juxtaposition. Unparalleled fidelity, unity, devotion, immediately followed by the king's death in battle because of a decision the chronicler frames as refusing to listen to God's command, even though it came in a really unconventional way.
It really makes you reconsider what faithfulness or, wisdom in leadership even looks like. Here's a king who did so much right, religiously speaking, yet his reign ends in catastrophe because of what seems like one critical misstep in judging a situation.
And that brings us right back to maybe the most challenging question this chapter leaves us with.
Yeah.
What does Josiah's refusal to listen to Necho, whose message Necho claimed was from God, and which the writer seems to back up, what does that tell us about how we discern guidance?
Yeah.
How do you weigh something that feels like divine direction when it comes from a totally unexpected source, maybe even an adversary? It's a profound thing to think about how you interpret messages or circumstances that come from outside your normal comfort zone, but might actually hold real weight. Makes you wonder, doesn't it?